I have been giving media interviews all week about the 215 children. And I think in this country, there's finally an appetite for change, renewed calls for reconciliation, schools in Calgary changing their names overnight when we have been working over a year to get a name changed, a statue of MacDonald being removed in Charlottetown overnight after just 2 weeks ago, City Council said that that would not happen. If you're Indigenous, the National Indian Residential School line is 1-866-925-4419. If you are non-Indigenous, I would encourage you to check in on your friends and neighbors and colleagues. Make a financial donation if you can. Write a letter to your elected representative asking them how the 94 calls of action are going. For the record, in 2019, we were at 9 of the 94. In 2020, we had gone backwards to 8 of the 94. And Mr. Jagmeet Singh on the news on Monday had said that we're at 12. So still lots of work to be done. The good news is that many University Press authors are really leading the way in producing these powerful works that give witness to profound racism against Black, Indigenous, and Asian peoples in Canada's past and present. Their commitment shown by these authors really exemplify the responsibility of publishers to bring their voices to a wide audience. But again, before reconciliation, there must be truth. And we are still on this truth-finding mission. Okay, just so all of you know, this event is being recorded, and how the format of this panel is going to work is that I'm going to introduce the members of a press. Then they are going to speak for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then I will go on and introduce the next team of people from a different press. So first, it's my pleasure to introduce UBC to the conversation. Jerry Fontaine, makwa ogimaa, is from the Ojibway-Anishinabe community of Sagkeeng, where he served as chief from 1987 to 1998. He currently teaches Indigenous Studies at the University of Winnipeg. We look forward to hearing you speak with Darcy Cullen about the book you published with UBC Press, Our Hearts Are as One Fire, an Ojibway-Anishinabe Vision for the Future, a shared vision, a manifesto. This remarkable work draws on Ojibway, Ota'wa, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, Ishkodawatomi-Anishinabe worldviews, history, and lived experience to develop a wholly Ojibway-Anishinabe interpretation of the role of traditional leadership and governance today. Darcy Cullen is an assistant director, acquisitions at UBC Press, and the founder of Raven Space Publishing. She has published in Indigenous Studies for nearly 2 decades and has written about the collaborative nature of publishing in articles and the book, editors, scholars, and the social text. So it is my pleasure now to hand the conversation over to UBC Press.
Thank you, Crystal, for creating this space for us and reminding us of the contexts that bring us into this conversation. And it's a pleasure to be part of this important conversation today and to be here with Jerry to talk about the publication of his book, Our Hearts Are as One Fire. I'll start by saying that I first met Jerry when he sent me his book proposal. I read it and was struck by 2 facets of the book: this historical dive into the journeys of remarkable leaders challenging colonization, and the demonstration of their distinct leadership styles, which offer principles of governance that can support Indigenous leaders of today and tomorrow. And also evident was his motivation to write the book, which is based on his PhD work, in turn motivated by his own experience as a nation chief with real world experience of life on the reserve and of political structures under Indigenous and Canadian law. The book shows how three great historical leaders, some of them made famous but known through depictions in popular culture, Obondiak, we know as Pontiac, Tecumseh, also Shingwak, at different points in colonial history, who stood up for their people and for their ways of life. It tells their stories of governance and leadership from an Ojibway-Anishinabe perspective, and using Ojibwe-Moan language, knowledge, perspective. So it reframes this history while sharing a vision for Indigenous leadership. It's a beautiful blend of oral history, written scholarship, deep political theory, and practical considerations and advice. What's so significant and special about it, in my view, is the way it presents a way for Anishinaabe today to reconnect with non-colonized forms of thinking and decision-making. An important consideration in the publication of the book is that these leaders are ancestors. Their descendants are alive today, and these stories are their family stories. So usually as an acquiring editor, I shepherd a book through the editorial process. I serve as the author's guide in the publishing sphere. With this book, Jerry was my guide through the ceremonial process. He had forged relationships with the descendants, and it was important the stories be told in a good way. So from the descendants, we learned that the book for them represents an arrow into the future. It will guide leaders of today and the next generations of leaders. It will help to give collectiveness and unity among their peoples that they've worked for in their time. So Jerry, you've talked about the relationships and what it means to work with family stories, and also the importance of being on the ground, knowing people's customs and lived experiences. Do you want to talk about what it meant to publish this book and the stories of ancestors?
Bonjour, makwa ogimaa de goni, makwa na tuute. Ojibway-Anishinabe, in Sagkeeng tunchi. Machenda ma bijan nongom. Anisha, iwabdan ane jibetek mewete wasagine benon. Awe benun chiok. Awe ushkaye sok. Kinebok mewete awe. Kinama gewe megon. Can't wait to do and see good thing. Awe winter goje. Awe winter goje. Ogimaa. Utapanan pene go. Awe Ishkodawatomi-Anishinabe Vision. Indenamoen. Mij go gwek uskai sakshugo. Obenun chiok. Jamacha. Macha. Miwete ya wok ginebe no. Again, Marshall, New Unakina Dash, at Suka Nak, Ni Miquina Mark, Gwek, Banon Giok, Shigo, Sky Suck, Inge, Ni Miquina Ma, Ni Marshall, Dam Gay, May Dash, Nungun, Nin, Ticket. Mia Panach to win. Mia. Before I answer your question, Doris, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is my Ojibwe name is Makwa Ogimaa, Bear Chief. Makwa Nututem, I'm Bear Clan. I'm an Ojibwe speaking human being. Ojibway-Anishinabe, Sagkeeng, and I'm from where the river widens. And I mentioned that I have really mixed feelings about being in the on this panel today, given what's been happening or what we've heard at the Tecumseh. Again, you might feel bad about it. And I mentioned in my opening remarks about these babies, these young people that are no longer with us. They're, they've gone through the Western door, so they're in a better place. And I mentioned as well, Benachtuwin, that's to me, Benachtuwin and Ojibway is a form of genocide. It means you've destroyed something, you've taken something. They've taken they've taken their life. They've taken their language. They've taken their culture. They've taken their world and how they viewed the world. So I come from a really a political place, and I'm hoping, I want it to be positive. I hear people talk about reconciliation, healing, and all of that. I think that's, to me, it makes no sense at all. The book, Our Hearts Are on Fire, Ishkodawatomi-Anishinabe speaks to this idea of the nakwe, this middle ground, where there's Manatshi-Anishinabe, where there's respect. Manatshi-Anishinabe, where there's respect. Manatshi-Anishinabe, where there's respect. Manatshi-Anishinabe, where there's respect. The Kimanam, our land. Exclamation mark. And so that's where I come from. And anyways, I'll leave it there. And Darcy, I apologize. I've kind of gone off on a rant there. I apologize.
That's the passion, Jerry, that we see in your work, and I'm glad for others to see it too.
I'm going to, with all my heart, I'm going to say Apachichimi, a great UBC Press, for this opportunity to talk about Ishkodawatomi-Anishinabe, because I think it's important in terms of Nongum today, Waswabun, the future, or Atanan, what comes behind us. And it's I guess, it's a vision. It's a vision based on the actually the visions of these three leaders, who challenged the colonial world. I mean, what was happening in 1763, strangely enough, and it's not surprising that it's still happening today. We still have to talk about children that have been taken, children that have lost their lives, families that have lost their children, their brothers, their sisters, their nieces, and so on. It's outrageous, and everybody is talking about how angry they are. No one's. I haven't heard anyone say, you know what, we should talk to Phil Fontaine. We should talk to Ken Young. We should talk to Teddy Keynes, all of these people that were there at the outset to bring this to light.
Jerry?
And everybody's angry. Everybody's this and that, right? Anyways, sorry.
Well, I wanted to connect the point you made about respect and the point you're making now about speaking to the people who are directly affected by these events, that hold stories, that are the knowledge holders and story holders and carry them forward. Could you talk a little bit about the book and your relationship and some of the protocols and ceremonies that made you ready to publish these descendant relationships and ancestral stories?
Yeah, I have my pipe with me. I have my migwan, the pipe and my eagle feathers here. So I have to be mindful. And I let my emotion get the better of me. Like I said, I feel bad. He's got this guy. I'm angry. But in terms of the book itself, in terms of sacred stories and spiritual history, the personal stories and the moral stories, all of that, guided our people. And in terms of the families, these families have guarded their grandfather's stories for over a century, and they speak of this kindness. They speak of this Ojibway-Anishinabe, respecting the human being. And they entrusted Darcy, they entrusted you, Carrie's here, they entrusted Carrie, UBC Press with that story, to treat the stories of their grandfathers with respect. And the talks that we had in terms of protocol, the sharing, the passing of tobacco, as a gift to you, to cherish their stories and to treat their stories with treat their family stories with respect. And they trusted. There was a great deal of trust that was afforded to UBC Press, and I as well. In terms of UBC Press's walk with all of us, to bring this book to fruition, it was. I have the utmost respect for all of you, and I apologize if I raise my voice. I tell people, oddly enough, that it's my mom. I hear when I speak Ojibwe, my mom would never raise her voice, so I have to apologize to my mom too, because I raise my voice in using the language. And
well, your voice is loud and clear in the book, Jerry. And what I'd maybe like to say to publishers in the room and others thinking about publishing is the possibilities for us to be able to work in different ways. For me to be able to, as an editor, have the opportunity to have a forum to speak with Jerry and bring forward questions, specific questions that we might have had about the publication, and to discuss parts of the process and goals and understand intentions. This is all really possible for us to do through relationships, through respect, and through particular protocols for these families, and they might be different. But to open that door, to say, this was a really wonderful process, and we came out of it with a book that we're all really proud of and is stronger for that process. So thank you, Jerry, for bringing this to us and having us kind of rethink and what's really possible.
Do you have one more thing you would like to add, Jerry?
I was just going to say, when I come back as well from, school, I remember telling my mom, and she asked me, do you want soup? I told her, speak English to me. And she said, and I said, speak English to me. And she said, how come? Well, I said, well, the nuns said, we're going to lose our language anyways. So we should learn English. We should speak English. And my mom, and I don't know what would have happened. That was a critical point in my life. 6 years old, I'm challenging my mom, asking her to speak English to me. And she tells me, don't ever forget where you were from. Ishkodawatomi-Anishinabe because you're a human being. And then she said this to me in English. If you think, and if you want to speak English, you can leave this house, and then you can speak English all you want outside of this house, away from us. But to me, that was a lesson taught and a lesson learned. And and I thank her
Yes,
very
thank
much
you.
for taking that stand with me. So much.
Thanks so much to you both. I know 10 to 12 minutes is not a lot of time, but you did a brilliant job on informing us about the importance of this work. And Jerry, please don't ever apologize for having feelings or being angry. We're all here alongside you. So it's now my pleasure to move on to University of Alberta Press. And on behalf of the University of Alberta Press, we will hear about the publication of Our Whole Gwich'in Way of Life Has Changed. Gwich'in Ku Guidandai Thak Ijak Gunli, Stories from the People of the Land. This book is an invaluable compilation of historical and cultural information based on a project originally conceived by the Gwich'in Social and Cultural Institute to document the biographies of the oldest Gwich'in elders in the Gwich'in settlement region. Leslie McCartney, author, is a cultural anthropologist specializing in oral history. She is an associate professor and the curator of oral history at the University of Alberta, Fairbanks. Sharon Snowshoe, the co-author, Gwich'in Tribal Council, is a member of the Tetlek Gwich'in Band in Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories. She is the director of the Gwich'in Tribal Council Department of Culture and Heritage, formerly known as the Gwich'in Social and Cultural Institute, where she oversees numerous cultural, oral history, traditional knowledge, and other heritage projects. Okay, well, it's my pleasure to hand the floor over to Leslie and Sharon.
Yes, thank you very much. And Matt, I believe Matt from University of Alberta Press is also participating. Am I correct?
I'm sorry, that's my bad. Also, Matt Bunton is an acquisitions editor with the University of Alberta Press. Apologies, Matt.
Oh, no worries. Thanks, Crystal, and thanks to Darcy and Jerry for starting us off.
Thank you.
So I see Leslie, and I think Sharon is also going to join us on the screen. Great, so thanks. I have a few questions to guide our conversation. Leslie and Sharon will share more about the book, but this is a collection of 23 stories collected over decades. So based on lots of deep relationships. And so the first relationship that I think we wanted to start by talking about is Leslie and Sharon's, and wondered if you could start by talking about where the project came from and how the two of you came to work together.
This is Sharon. I'd like to say thank you for the invite to this event. In 1998, the Gwich'in Social and Cultural Institute, at that time it was called that. It's now called the Department of Cultural Heritage under the Gwich'in Tribal Council, asked Leslie McCartney to be the project coordinator of the Gwich'in Elders Biographies Research Project. And at that time, Leslie was then a postgraduate, and she was a mature student that was at the university working on her MA in cultural anthropology. I'll just hand it over to Leslie.
Thank you, Sharon. Yes, and I echo Sharon's thanks for inviting us to be on this panel today. So yes, I had seen a little notice in a booklet called Into the Next Millennium, which the GSCI had published. It was a 5-year plan on projects that they wanted to do in the next 5 years. And one of them was to document the life stories of prominent elders. And I thought that was a really interesting project. And when I had reached out to Indra Critch, who was then the research director, and asked her how the project was going, she basically said, well, it's not. And if you want to be the lead researcher on it, you can go right ahead. And so I thought, oh, how exciting. And, you know, how hard can it really be to interview some wonderful elders and write their stories into a book? This should be really, really fun and really not too hard at all. And I really looked forward to it. I don't think any of us realized that it would actually take us 20 years to actually write everything and get it published. It was a big project. And so Sharon became the executive director in, yeah, that's right. So then we were working together since then. And prior to that was working with Ingrid Critch and Alistine Andre, who are also then working with the GSCI. So this has been a project that has included many, 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 many people.
Mm-hmm.
One of the unique things about it, certainly something that we talked about, or that the press talked about with you in developing the project, was the book's authorship. And it's unique for, in some ways, Leslie and Sharon and I spoke last week about how it might seem logical from a university or academic press perspective for this to be a book edited by Dr. McCartney with stories and contributions by the 23 elders. But instead, the decision was made for this to be co-authored by Leslie McCartney and the Gwich'in Tribal Council. So I wonder if you could speak about that decision. And I mean, I think that decision came over a number of years, so.
I'll go first, Sharon, if that's okay. Yeah, to tell you the truth, in all the years that we worked on this book, I don't think any of us even thought about who the author was going to be. And so when we submitted the manuscript, it was like, oh, they want an author. Okay, well, I'll put it out there. Let's say Leslie McCartney and 23 elders. And so the University of Alberta Press said, no, we can't have 24 authors listed as authors in a book. That just doesn't work in the publishing world. And so we started talking about, well, how do we author this? I mean, traditionally, you take oral history interviews, you take the transcripts, you put them in some sort of an assemblance to tell a story. Then you're kind of an editor, but this book is far more than just taking transcripts and putting them on a page. There was decades of research that also went into it, and decades of research that the Gwich'in Social and Cultural Institute had done, and previous researchers like Sharon had done for genealogy that's included in the stories, for place names, the history of Gwich'in, there's a chapter on that, and then there's a very scholarly chapter at the very end discussing the literature and how we came to decisions that we made. So I think those combinations, it was sort of viewed that, well, it is authorship, not just editing for Leslie, and the Tribal Council also contributed a great amount to this. It was the GSCI, which is now part of the Tribal Council, as Sharon said. And so that's how we came up with the two authors. But we do have all the elders are contributors. And so that's also noted in the book, which is very important. So as much as we would have loved to have, 25 names as authors, that just wasn't achievable. So I hope that's that sort of explains that. Sharon?
Just one thing, that the title had to go to the leadership of the Gwich'in Tribal Council to be approved, so that there's a process there too for the title too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly part of, I know, Leslie's early research and interview process, and all the way through the book's review and production, that the council was very, very closely involved.
Yes.
And Sharon, did you also want to mention how the GSCI has worked with many non-Indigenous researchers in the past and how authorship has worked in those cases too? Because this was also sort of based on that.
Okay. When we do research in the Gwich'in settlement area and we do interviews with our people, we give credit to our people. That's one thing that we like to do, and we like to have them use their own names because of their information. And we do this because we want, like, say in the future, if the future generation refers back to the work, then they'll be able to identify with the people that that has given the information. So we like to give credit, like not only to our own people, but to all the people that work with us, so that that they know that we do give credit where credit is due.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm wondering, maybe Crystal or Tate can tell us about time, if we have time for one more question, or.
We have about 2 minutes, so I think one more question is perfect.
Sure. So as we talked about, this is an ambitious project, based on decades of research. And throughout that process, I know that all the people involved have worked to balance how to present this to multiple audiences, both to the community as well as to outsiders, including scholars. And so maybe briefly, if you could each touch on how you've approached that challenge and how you've shaped the work for those different audiences.
Sure. Do you want to go first, Sharon, or do you want me to?
Can you go first and then I'll.
Okay. Yes, originally when we first started this project, we envisioned it maybe a series of little tiny books, maybe one of each elder, that would go into the schools. But once the elders started telling their stories, we realized that this speaks to a really, really wide audience, both Gwich'in and non-Gwich'in, Canadian international. And so how do you balance that? And so the scholarly chapter at the very end talks about the scholarship that went in and the decisions that we made to make this research work and to present it. And I'm hoping that it's an invaluable and best practice for anthropology and ethnography and Indigenous studies. Northern studies is really what, scholarship. I really hope that it's a sort of a new and a fresh approach to having these stories told. But what the elders themselves were the people who wanted these stories recorded. They wanted their future generations to know their stories and to learn from them. And Jordan Peterson actually is the great grandson of one of the elders who is in this book, and he wrote the foreword to the book, and I cried when I read it, because what he says is, I am one of those future generations that had the opportunity to learn directly from some of the elders that are honored and celebrated in this book. I'm also one of the future generations that will learn about my identity through these specific stories. And so I think we achieved what the elders asked us to do just by him saying that. And so I was deeply honored that he wrote that and felt that way about the book. And Sharon, you have got a lot of responses from the book from the community, so I'll let you talk to that.
I just wanted to thank Leslie for saying that the elders had given direction on this project. Thank you for mentioning that. And the first book that I gave was to our president of the Gwich'in Tribal Council. And what he said about how did he describe the book was, it's a treasure. And the other thing that another person came to my office and said, I'd like a copy of that book, because when we go out on the land, we read those books. We like to read those books. And just this Sunday on our we have church on the radio, our local radio station, because we can't go into our church. And the person that does the church drew on this book because she was talking about how our elders supported and looked after each other. and that was the theme of the sermon. So people are incorporating it in every way that that they can in their homes and at the community at large. And can you just mention about the cover, Leslie?
Yes, actually, the cover is a beautiful, beautiful photograph of Pierre Benoit and his wife Annie Benoit at their fish camp. And these photographs were actually taken by Pierre's nephew, James Jerome, who back in the 1970s went out on the land and took dozens and hundreds of pictures, I think thousands probably, of a way of life that he saw that was changing. And tragically, he passed away in a fire in Inuvik in his 20s. And a lot of these negatives were pulled out of the ruins. And this is one of them. And so I think it really, first of all, honors archival research that's so invaluable. It's the elders themselves, and from Jerome always wanted to publish a book of his photographs, and so maybe in this one small way is one of the photographs published.
And it did win an award. Eh?
And it has won an award, yes. Maybe the press can talk about that. And I also want to mention that Dr. Fraser's grandmother is also featured in the book. She was wonderful.
I was going to say I'm a little bit biased about this book because the day I received it and flipped open to Marka Bullock was a very special day. I do think we have to move on now. Thank you all for sharing that with us. That's very valuable.
Thank you.
Thanks. So McGill Queen's University Press is next, and they're here to talk about a long-standing series, the McGill Queen's Indigenous and Northern Studies. This series is co-edited by John Burroughs, Sarah Carter, and Arthur J. Ray, and includes books about Indigenous peoples in all parts of the Northern world. It includes original scholarship on their histories, archaeology, laws, cultures, governance, and traditions. Its mandate is to advance understanding of the political, legal, and social relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. We are joined here today by author and series co-editor Arthur J. Ray and press executive director Philip Sursone. Arthur J. Ray is professor emeritus of history at the University of British Columbia and is the author of Aboriginal Rights Claims and the Making and Remaking of History. Also, an illustrated history of Canada's Native people, Telling It to the Judge, and co-author of Bounty and Benevolence. Philip Sursone is the executive director of McGill Queen's University Press and has served in this role for over 3 decades. Welcome, Arthur and Philip. I will turn it over to you.
Can't hear you, Phil.
Where is Phil?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm a good listener. First of all, it's an honor to be here under these trying times. We're going to talk about, the series, and McGill Queen started the series many years ago, but it has been publishing on Indigenous issues since the 60s, when it was just McGill University Press. I first came into contact with Skip when I was working in Ottawa, giving grants to publishers. And Skip didn't know about this, but I wrote the check that supported his University of Toronto book, Give Us Good Measure, which he did with Donald Friedman, which was an economic analysis of relations between the Indigenous and people and the Hudson Bay Company. And what struck me about that book was its innovative approach and its extensive use of the Hudson Bay records, but also little studied sources, which proved to be highly illuminating. And so it gave us an understanding of Indigenous people and newcomers in this country. And they, in doing so, they considered models drawn from comparative economic anthropology, and so on and so on. So that's, and that is sort of the mandate also of the series. We were really honored a few years ago, and I'll tell the story here for the first time, because we published all the books that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation in the series, in both French and English. And it was quite a feat because I can't remember the year, but in that year, I got a call from Judge Sinclair saying that the books had to be published, and that if they were, this was in 1st of July, it was actually Canada Day. So, I remember it. And if they weren't published by December, Mr. Harper was going to shut down the whole project, and these books would not see the light of day. And could we do them? And I asked, how many have you, where are they? And some of them were not even in manuscript form. There were 8, and volume 1 is actually 2,000 pages. And I said, well, we could try and do them. And then, I was just floored by the fact that when Judge Sinclair said, they also have to be in French. And I said, oh my God. And so we put together a team of 36 translators to have it done. And by December, we did all the books except 3 in French. But it was, by that time, a new prime minister came in, Mr. Trudeau, and we got an extension on those 3 books in French. But the series was started by the late ethnohistorian Bruce Trigger. And he really pioneered Indigenous studies in North America, just not in Canada. And we're so lucky to have Skip as one of the editors of the series, along with Sarah Carter there at the University of Alberta, and John Burrows, who's at UVic. And we work with Skip and the others in deciding which books go into the series. The press, I just did a rough count 2 days ago of the books that we've published, what I call in Indigenous Studies, and it includes the whole North, in not just in Canada, but circumpolar, and there's about 350 books, of which almost 100 are in the Indigenous and Northern series. So Skip is not going to be talking about one of his books, but a book in the series. But he does have a book in the series. We've done 4 books with Skip, but I've stopped counting as to how many he did. It's closer to 20, and he's still going. He's got 2 more coming out. But he's going to talk about one of the books in the series and its significance. So Skip, over to you to talk about the book that's in the series.
Okay, Phil. As Phil said, he asked me to speak about one of the books in the series other than my own. And it was a challenge because my latest count is we're at 101 in the series. So picking a book out of the 101 is not an easy task. And I thought I might explain, this is the book I picked. Sequoia, people and the land and the laws. And let's see, I guess it's coming. Anyway, one of the reasons I picked the book, I was thinking back about when I was a graduate student, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on my own background, but when I was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin in 1960s, so I'm a product of the 60s, I have to admit that. So-called ethnohistory, Native history, Indigenous history, and in the States, of course, it was Indian history. That's the title of my first book, Indians in the Fur Trade. But what struck me about it at that time is that most of the research academics were doing with Native groups was really addressing academic theoretical concerns about, quote, primitive people. And they would look at various Indigenous groups to sort of test theories or to develop theoretical ideas or look for examples to prove theories. What was not common at the time was research originating from the Indigenous communities in which the Indigenous people played at least an equal part or took the lead. And I would look back through our series. The other thing that struck me is that a lot of the research done in the 60s and the 70s and into the early 80s was primarily solo authored. But if you look at the series, increasingly they're multiple authored, and we've heard from the two previous presenters the nature of this co-authorship. And one of the reasons that I picked People, Lands, and Laws is, I think, to me, this is a model and an indication how far we've come, because this book originated in the Native community. The two lead authors are Indigenous people from that community. One is a professor of linguistics at Simon Fraser, Mary Ann Ignace, and her spouse, Ron Ignace, is the chief of these people. And going back to the point that Jerry made earlier is, when I was a student, there wasn't that much respect for Indigenous knowledge. It had to be validated by testing it against, quote, Western knowledge and science and so forth. That's no longer the way it approaches. And what's really nice about this book is the extent to which they interact with all knowledge, Western, or what they call the newcomer knowledge created by scholars in the past, and knowledge from the elders, stories from the land. And they do this to tell a story of these people in their homeland and over a 10,000 year period, which is really quite extraordinary. And I'm a historical geographer by training, so I appreciate well illustrated works. This book is amazingly well illustrated, but photography, drawings, maps. It's highly illustrated, and I think on all these different grounds, I think it's kind of symbolic of where the series is headed now. It's I think we're more respectful of all lines of evidence and all points of views, and particularly encourage, as again the University of Alberta pointed out, to try to interact with Indigenous communities and Indigenous voices. So I think it's one of many. I mean, I picked this one because I'm an historical geographer at heart, and there's a lot of geography in this book, so I love it for that reason. So maybe I should stop now, so in case there are any questions.
Great, thank you so much. We are coming to the end of this very short panel. It seems an hour, it seems like nothing. And I just really want to thank everyone for their contributions and work. Many of you have been doing this for your entire careers. I just want to acknowledge your service and your commitment. I wonder if I could just put a question out there. And this is my question, a personal question, I suppose. What kind of advice would you give to an Indigenous person who wants to share their story but is scared for whatever reason? scared to put themselves out there, that the book won't be good enough, that all of these fears, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think all authors are scared. Always afraid you're going to put a mess out there.
Well,
Yeah.
if I could comment on that is what you really have to do, because they haven't written a book before, and some of them may have not even written an article. And to basically start talking to them and say, well, let's take some baby steps first. And why don't you just sit down and even in point form, put down what you would like to the audience to know, because it's not so much about what they want to write, but also the kind of knowledge that they want to pass on to other people. So I've had many authors that you bring them up and then they write a chapter, and from that you start asking questions about the chapter, and all of a sudden it has many chapters. So it's my advice to them has been to basically start and very small, and then work with them closely and expand. But you have to be a good listener, as opposed to, because it's the kind of book that they want to write and that they should write, and not the kind of book you want as a publisher.
Great advice. Anyone else?
I think mine are along the similar lines, to say, be confident in the fact that you have a message, you have a story to tell, you have a point of view. And so have that confidence and talk to an editor, talk to others, and write. Just start doing it. And then you can get feedback, and then you can build on that. So just, have the confidence, talk to editors, talk to others, and go for it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. When I was finishing my PhD, I used the acronym BIS, or bum in seat, that if I'm not sitting right here, I am not writing. And I also had a baby during my PhD, and this phrase, when baby sleeps, you sleep. And so I took that to heart. But my supervisor said to me, well, also when baby writes, you write. I'm like, well, the baby's not writing. Exactly. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. This was brilliant. I appreciated all of your words and your insights. I would like to thank Kathy Crooks for organizing this panel. Amazing work. Thanks, Kathy. To the U of A for hosting Congress. And yeah, it's my pleasure to have met all of you. Perhaps our paths will cross again during this week of virtual meetings, and keeping the 215 children in our hearts and everyone else. Yeah, so take good care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. The recording will be up in the next couple of days, just for reference. But yeah, it's very well done.
And okay, thank you, Tate, for your support. And thank you, colleagues, for doing this work. I know it's such a busy time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. It's a great concept. Glad to participate. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.